Welcome, students, to Informal Logic 101. Your teacher is me, Dan Green, because why not? So, I'm going to try my hand a little bit here at live teaching of Informal Logic and see how well that goes since I don't have any lesson plan or script or anything like that. I don't know why this could possibly go wrong. But one of my subscribers and somebody I've talked to and exchanged ideas with over time is Grave to the Flame, and I wanted to try to find a way to engage him one on one to teach him informal logic, but his technology isn't quite there, and his accessibility to things isn't quite there. So I thought, well, maybe I'll do this and see where this goes and see how it works. And the first thing that came to mind was because of a comment that he's made. And this is a mistake that he and others have made repeatedly. So I wanted to cover that first, even though there's many other things I could cover first. So he started with one of my favorite things to start with involving lobsters, of course, and said, premise one was that everything contingent has a cause. Well, I objected to that, not due to any informal fallacies, but due to a form of the argument, the formal fallacy. The word everything has a problem inherent in it. So does the word nothing or always or never, nowhere, no one, everyone. These are all words that are the most extreme version of that category that you could come to. And I think the correct term is superlative, although if you're a grammar expert and you know of a better term to call these words, let me know. But regardless, when you say everyone, you need to be able to have that statement be demonstrably demonstratable, that this is a known fact about the world. This is something that is not disputed. It is a universal known, so to speak. So the classic example: all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore he is mortal. Well, how can we make that first statement? Because it says all men are mortal. Well, because there is no exception to a man being mortal that we are aware of. And it's been consistent throughout time, throughout culture, throughout ages. As far as we know, all men have been mortal. You could also say all humans are mortal, or all animals are mortal. You could say that in any number of ways. Perhaps you could say that all life has an end, although that might be harder to make as a bold statement, because there could be life that we don't know about that doesn't end. Although positing that would be an issue. So you might want to be hedge your bet there and say, all life that we know does end. So it depends on, how stringent you really think the statement is to be able to say all, none, never, always, whatever, because you're going to get into a debate about whether or not you can prove that the statement is true before you even get to your other premises. Your other premises don't even matter right now. Your first statement has to be proven. So you'd have to show that everything that's contingent has a cause. Well, how are you going to do that? You have to show everything. That's kind of hard to do. Nobody can do that. Well, there you go. There's another superlative. Nobody, no human can do this. Well, why? Because we don't have access to everything. So it is a fair statement to make that there is nobody that can do this. At least not yet. Maybe eventually, but not right now. So it's a known versus a possibility or a probability versus an unknown. And if it's a possibility or probability, you're probably better off with saying something like, as far as we know, or what has been observed, or something like that. So, as far as we know, or uh, everything that we have thus observed that is contingent has a cause, or something like that. You can word it in different ways so that you avoid, even though you're using the word everything, you're adding to it to clarify that, well, you're saying not really everything. You're actually saying the things that we observe. So you could even go further and just get rid of the word everything and just say the things that we have observed, or as far as we know, or something of this nature. And the opposite's true. You say nowhere or no one knows, fill in the blank. That has to be a universal known fact. Like, you could maybe take a math problem that is yet unsolved, and you could make a very strong statement that no one knows this solution. And, well, that might be the case, and that might makes it something that you might want to say, well, as far as I know, nobody knows the answer to this question yet because it's unsolved. So hypothetically, if somebody knew the answer, then it wouldn't be unsolved. But that person has not come forward. That I can say for certainty, because otherwise it would be solved. So no one has yet come forward to solve the unsolved mathematical problem. That's a claim that I don't have to show to be true, because there's obvious inherent truths within it that are built that we go, okay, yes, I've analyzed what you said, and I couldn't find a way to pick it apart. What else? So all these superlatives, and sometimes I'll say superlative because my brain decides to do funny things to words, but all these superlatives, you want to try to avoid if you can, because then you don't run into these problems with the format of your argument. But sometimes they're necessary, or sometimes they're true by tautology or by merit of the way things are. All A is A. Well, it's a tautology. It's also the law of identity. So yes, that's true. Why is it true? Because it is. There isn't any more to it. There isn't a deeper argument. This is just how it works, and this is like the foundation of a lot of logic, and those are referred to as axioms. So that gets into deeper territory of formal and informal logic. But this is a common mistake. Many apologists will make this a mistake. I'm thinking like William Lane Craig has often said, everything that exists begins, or everything that begins to exist has a cause. And I'm like, wait, stop. You don't know that. You don't know that. You only know about the things that you know about. You can't say everything. So you already need to change that before you go on. And then there's also the possibility, although I'm not a quantum physicist expert by any means, or I don't have enough knowledge about it to make a statement like this, that there is a thing in quantum that might not have a cause, or at least the cause is something so different than the normal types of causes that we're used to, that we might as well not even call it a cause at that point. Although, since we don't have any other word, that might be the word we would have to use. But because we don't want to be guilty of equivocation, we got to be careful with our use of the words. And so, well, the Kalam cosmological argument, which is something that William Lane Craig loves and would marry if it was a human, is an example of the first premise going off the rails immediately, regardless of the bad science and bad logic that follows it, because the form is incorrect. You don't know everything. And there's also the possibility that the quantum stuff might screw that up anyway. So a better way to frame it would be, as far as we have observed, things have causes. Even a better one would be a hypothetical syllogism, although in argument, those are seen as a weaker sort of argument than a modus ponens or modus teleos, which I'll have to cover later at some point. So that's kind of the bare basics of superlatives in regards to, you know, when you make a claim, you have the burden of proof. I think most people know that by now, hopefully. So when you make the statement all X is Z, that must be either known or demonstrably demonstrated. It must be unquestioned, as it were. And if there's a hint of a possibility that there is a counter example, then you might be called out on that, and then you're arguing your premise rather than getting to the next premise and getting to the conclusion. Hopefully, ideally, you want your opponent to argue against your conclusion, not point out the logical fallacies of your argument. If your argument is sound and the conclusion therefore follows, then your opponent has to argue against the conclusion, and that's the strongest sort of debate then, because you can still have an argument over a conclusion, because two sides hypothetically can have logical arguments that result in different conclusions. And although that might seem odd to posit, it is possible. Okay, so I guess going back to the very basics of logic, since that's what I'm calling this, intro into informal logic, maybe some definitions might be in order. Like I said, I'm winging this, so might just be like, nobody watched it, screw it, I'll do it recorded and do it that way. Okay, so logic is, of course, a word that is like a rational way of thinking, and there's many different types of logic. There's math logic, and there's logic like I'm talking about, which is sort of the philosophical logic. There's abstract logic, which is, it's like, well, that wait, how can you have abstract logic? There's all sorts of different versions, but for my purposes, when I say the word logic, I'm usually talking about formal and informal logic. So what are those? So formalized logic, if you look at that, you'll see all these symbols that mean nothing to you at first. You'll see probably you might get into logic gates, which is part of math, but also some of those gates are in logic. So those are interesting and to learn about, because many of them are shared. Like disjunctive syllogism is an OR gate, for example. So in both math and electronics, you have what's called an OR gate. So it's either on or off. It's yes or no. So, well, there's a disjunctive syllogism because it's one or the other. So you have this shared common feature that can occur in multiple different versions of logic. Informal logic is mostly about the format itself, is how I've come to view it. Now, you can be more nuanced than I'm being, but I want to kind of try to just simplify it to the best I can. What a syllogism is within formal logic. Like the whole thing of having at least two premises before you have a conclusion, that rule is found in formal logic. What a syllogism is, what a modus ponens, modus teleos, hypothetical syllogism, and a disjunctive syllogism, is all found within formal logic. All of those terms and more. And then you have the informal fallacies, and you go, well, why are they informal? Because the formal means you broke the rules of the game itself, whereas the informal is like you're playing the game, but you're not doing a very good job. So informal logic in and of itself is using formal logic on ordinary everyday speech natural language, as it's called. And you've probably heard me by now say the words natural language, and I'll clarify natural language if I can. Natural language is, well, what we're saying. I'm assuming, as I say every single word I'm saying, that you understand what I mean by the word I and me and the word and itself. All of these words that I'm spewing forth, I'm assuming that you know what I'm talking about at some level, that you understand in the same or similar way that I understand it. And for most words, this appears to be true, but then you get into more complicated words like, that can be vague, or there's some words that can be paradoxical in nature, like a heap of sand. Well, what's a heap? How big is a heap? It's vague. There is no predefined limit on the size of a heap, so you can construct a paradox of sand removal. You remove 1 grain of sand from the heap. Is it still a heap? Yes. You keep doing that. Is it until you're left with 1 grain of sand, and you say, "Is that a heap?" And it's like, "Yeah, I guess." You never until you remove that, and then now you don't have any sand, so now you don't have a heap of sand. Although you could have a heap of something. So, because it's not defined. So balding is also one of those sort of words where it's like, well, he's balding. Okay, well, he's not bald yet, because to be bald means to be hairless, right? Okay, yeah. So if you have one hair left, you're still balding, but you're not bald. So you could say, well, George Costanza from Seinfeld, he's not bald. He's balding, but he's not bald. Even though he's missing a lot of hair, he's not missing all his hair. So why does he say that he's bald? Well, because it's more of a basic understanding that what we socially mean by bald is not purely without hair, but missing a lot of hair in certain regions of the head. So by saying bald in that sense, when George Costanza says, I was bald, because he has a toupee, is the kind of colloquial understanding of the word bald. And when Elaine takes his hairpiece off, tosses it out the window, and he's like, well, now he's bald again. Well, but he has hair on the side, so he's not bald, but he's mostly bald. And he goes out with a woman who is completely bald. She has no hair at all on her head, although the eyebrows are hair, but they're not on the head, so we don't consider that bald. So words are really odd like that, and so we run into potential problems that we call the natural language problem, which is distinct from natural language itself. But when we're using informal logic, we're looking at somebody's statements, and we're using the rules of formal logic and the methodology of the informal fallacies, and we're trying to deduce what the person's argument is. And some of this requires what's called critical analysis, which is a whole thing in and of itself. Critical analysis is very difficult to describe or explain. It's essentially, I want to say it's kind of like reading between the lines, but there's far more to it than just that. It's trying to figure out what the author is saying. And so that it's a lot of intuition, a lot of guesswork is there, a lot of extrapolation, like what did they say before this, leading up to it, and what could this mean? And, you put the best interpretation that you can possibly think of on what they've said so far. So you try to go about it as fairly as possible, because unless they've presented it in a syllogism form, they were not aware, perhaps, that they were making an argument, because all statements can be arguments, or all language, all dialogue is a form of argumentation to some degree. And there's different types of dialogue that I've covered before. But for our purposes, we're talking about persuasionary dialogue. where I'm trying to persuade my opponent and they're trying to persuade me of the idea at hand. And so we're using formal and informal logic combined to get there. So we might not present syllogisms to each other. And so our arguments might be phrased in what's called the essay format, where you have a broad statement that's made at the top, your main thesis statement, and then everything you say after supporting that statement. Whereas the syllogism is in reverse, where you have premises that lead to the conclusion rather than the conclusion and then things that support the conclusion, which, if you did it that way with a syllogism, would be broken. So, it all depends on what it is you're looking at and what it is the person has said, whether that be in text or speech or combination thereof. So something very basic like, I like ice cream. Well, there's a statement about myself and about ice cream that I've made and about my preference. Now, I could be lying. You don't know that. And so, well, what role does logic play in this sort of benign statement? It doesn't really have a role per se, because you've made a statement about your personal preference, and there might be some way to test it, but because we are social creatures, we tend not to test these sort of statements, and so we have what's called the social contract. And the social contract is that we assume innocence until guilt is proven. And this extends to even the law and things like this. Well, it should, but whether or not people want it to, the extent to law is another story. But so if I say, no, I didn't date that person, hypothetically, you should believe that I didn't date that person. But what if the other person says I did date them? Well, then who do you believe? Well, you also would have to believe them, but then the two contradict. So now you have a problem, because the social contract required you to believe each individual, but now now you're outside of the social contract, because you have reasons to doubt both people, and you do not know who is being dishonest or what's going on. Maybe they're mistaken, maybe they didn't remember right, or maybe someone's actively lying, or there's deception. And you don't have all the access to all the data and information, so you have to be skeptical of both of the person's statements, both the person that said yes I dated him and the person that said no, I never dated that person. And so then the burden of proof would then be upon the people that said these things to indicate in some way, shape, or form that these things are true. So in that, so with the social contract, benign statements that, and by benign we mean things that don't really hurt anybody, or that we don't see as, we can't think of a way that it could hurt someone at any rate at the time, although it might. I ate dinner last night. It's not going to hurt you to think that I did eat dinner last night. And you might at some level doubt that for some reason, but there's really no reason for you to doubt it. And so you grant the innocence and assume that I'm being honest. And only when presented with conflicting evidence would you think that I didn't eat dinner. So the fridge is full of food. How did you eat dinner? I ordered out. Oh, well, okay. I looked at your bank account. I didn't see anything removed. I had money lying around. Oh, okay. I can't prove that you didn't have money lying around, so maybe you did, and I didn't notice it. So at that point, it's like, although I had some contradictory evidence, at the end of that investigation, I ran into the social contract, and unless I want to accuse you of lying, which now I would then need proof of, I should assume innocence. is your wife cheating on you? Is one of these sort of things. Like, your wife is cheating on you. Oh, really? You have proof of that? Like, that's, because I'm assuming innocence of my wife not cheating on me. And so you then have the burden to show me that she is cheating on me. And it's not enough to say, well, she could be, or how do you know she isn't, or anything like that, because you've made the claim that she's cheating. Then, of course, we get into extraordinary claims, where the differences between saying I ate dinner last night and I ate dinner with the President of the United States last night, whereas the latter is extraordinary because it's quite unusual to do that, unless I had a job with politics. Then it becomes less unusual, and so you go into it at a probability angle, like how probable is it that I've eaten dinner with the President of the United States last night, and depending on that, you'll agree or disagree or require proof from me. And of course, the more extraordinary it is, the more evidence I should present. I ate dinner with aliens from another planet last night. Oh, really? Well, that's that's interesting. Do you have proof? Yeah, here's some photos and videos that I took. I got a selfie with them. Look at this. Oh, okay, well, you got something there. Now that might be fake. Certainly, and that might be even our first inclination, is to think that the videos and pictures were fake. But now that's kind of, to some degree, our burden to show in some way, shape, or form. Because we've been presented with some sort of evidence, and now we have to investigate further. And so that requires us to investigate. Because, again, we still have the assume they're innocent clause. And if they're not asking us for money, yeah, we're spending our energy on it, but if we're interested in it, we might investigate it. Of course, we might not be interested in it and be like, yeah, that's all fake, forget it, I'm walking away. And that's okay. You might have missed out on learning about, the first human to talk to aliens, but somebody, well, okay, you didn't lose that much. So it depends upon the sort of person you are and how much time you want to invest investigating into claims, because ultimately we can't investigate every claim made. And that's where the argument comes into play. Because if you have a valid and sound argument, then that should compel the person to look into the matter further. So the fact that I have pictures and video from me eating dinner with these aliens, and I can describe their spaceship, and I can describe them, and and all these things that I can do. All of this adds to the weight of my argument, although it's not in syllogism form. My argument is, here's some evidence, here's my statements that agree with that evidence, and even when you hide those pictures from me, I can still recall it in some detail, and the story doesn't change, although there might be bits I don't remember clearly, but it's consistent. And you take the photos to an expert, you take the videos to some expert, and you get them examined, and they don't look like fakes. And there's nothing about them that movie experts and can't, So it all starts to add up over time. But you might still at the end be skeptical at some level, because there is always room for doubt. Is nobody's ever experienced aliens until this one person. So, we might still hold out for more evidence, but we might personally decide that I have enough evidence to agree that this happened maybe it was a very elaborate hoax, and I can't detect that, and maybe my friend was fooled, but for now, because I have enough personal data to go on, I'm going to believe them. Now, that's the different from being, like saying, well, look, I want scientific data or something like that. Although the pictures and video could be part of some sort of scientific data. So the classic statement of, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence holds to be true. So that's the sort of the social contract. There are many types of, and the other thing to remember, and that's important, is regarding questions themselves, which is that questions contain premises. And a premise is, well, what your statement is. So my statement is, I like ice cream. So if I asked a question, do you like ice cream? It assumes that ice cream is a thing in the first place to like. So if I said, do you like farble leaf flour? You might be like, what the bleep is farble leaf flour? Because you've never heard of it. Maybe it's a thing, maybe it's not. So I can't answer the question in a yes or no way because I don't have the full data. Gary says hi in chat. Hi, Gary. Welcome to Lessons in Logic. If you have questions for the class, please let me know. Or questions for me that's teaching the class, which you are now of. Oh, that didn't make... Anyways. So, yeah, all questions contain premises. All statements are, in essence, a premise of some sort. And all dialogue is a category of debate. So you can analyze anything. Some people don't like that, but you can analyze anything. And so with persuasionary dialogue that I deal with typically over time in my various videos where I've had the logical fallacy counter, has been to talk about the logical fallacies that people make when they're trying to persuade me of a particular claim. And the one that I look at is usually claims about God, because I want to know if I'm wrong about this God thing. And for whatever reason, I don't appear to have direct evidence of a God. I don't have a way to see this God, whatever that is, if it is even a thing in the first place. And then for whatever other reason, I don't have any way to test this thing called God. And both of those are big problems, I would think, because it seems to me that we can do that with just about everything else, but there are certain things that we can't do that, like numbers and letters and musical notes. Oh, yes, you can write down a number, you can write down a letter, you can write down a musical note, but you can't find them like lying on the ground. Although you might find something that's in the shape of a 2, it's not a 2. It's just something that is in the shape of a 2. There is no 2 that exists out there, although some people claim that they do exist in some way. Letters are the same sort of way, where the letter A isn't really a thing. It's a concept in my mind. It's a concept in your mind, and we can talk about it. We can write it down, but it's not something that we can touch in the real world because it only exists in the mind. Yeah, okay, it exists on paper, but it's a representation of that idea. So it's still it's real, but it's not. It's like it's this other thing. It's a construct of the mind, is what I call it. So the things that we can't really test in a way are objects of the mind. You can test numbers to see if they're with math, but you always get if you're using math correctly, you'll get the same answer that somebody else will get, and it's a very solid science. It's probably one of the things that's been pointed to many times as being the only thing you can really be sure about, because it's so precise. And a lot of it's based on axioms that have to be true. The plus sign in and of itself means to do this certain function. You're taking that number and you're taking that number, and you are performing an action because that plus sign told you that you're adding these together. You're making them bigger. That's what that thing said to do. And so, you can't say, well, the plus sign is, arbitrary, and I want it to mean Apple. Well, I guess you could, but now you're not. You're no longer playing the math game. You're playing some other game at that point, and you're not going to be able to add numbers anymore because it's not going to make sense. One Apple one is what? Well, you'd have to, if you wanted to still be consistent, you'd have to say it's 2. Otherwise, you've made it into some other system, and then in that case, well, you already have the plus symbol. Why not just use that? Why make it into something else? What else? So another, I suppose, although I've covered like I said, I've covered the types of dialogue before, so I don't want to necessarily go over that right now. There are many logical fallacies, and one problem with this is that people tend to just look up the logical fallacy and memorize it, and then go, "Oh, I think I've identified this logical fallacy," and they might have actually successfully done that, but without understanding all the mechanisms and rules of logic, it's I would say the scenario that the analogy that I have is I know the rules of chess, but I don't know the strategy of chess. So the likelihood that I'm going to beat a grandmaster is pretty much 0. There's like a 0.000001, whatever that is, but it's real. You're not gonna bet on it. The grandmaster would have to make every possible mistake. They'd have to let me win, help me win, for me to win, and that's just unlikely. They're trying to win. They're in there, they're not sick. They're, it's not very likely that I'm going to win. So if you don't know all the things about informal and perhaps formal logic, then knowing some of the rules, knowing some of the fallacies doesn't really do you that much good, because the person that knows more is going to be able to beat you. And you're not even going to know why they beat you or in what way. They're just going to be like, no, you're wrong because of blah. And you're like, oh, I don't know what the bleep you just said. What? Huh? What? Oh, okay. Yeah. And it's, it's like you try to solve a complicated math problem and you have no idea how to even solve it because you haven't learned, trigonometry or something. You're staring at it and going like, well, but I know what 1 + 1 is, but that doesn't help you when dealing necessarily with doing this, because I don't even know where to start the dang operation on this thing. I've got letters and symbols up there, and I have no idea what the bleep I'm looking at. So I got to learn what each of those means, and then I got to learn how to use the formula to even hope to get to some sort of answer. And the same is kind of true with logic, where if you don't understand it, then when you use it, you're not going to do that good of a job. You're going to do a sloppy job more than likely. So it's good to know it. My motivation of trying my inadequate best to teach logic is, and through time, my effort on the channel has been to point out the logical fallacies in hopes that people will be interested enough to go learn more about that. And I don't know if that worked or not. I don't know, but straight up teaching logic can be kind of dull. I've seen so many videos that are just instructing logic, and it's like, it's kind of boring sometimes. So it's like, how do you make it interesting? I don't know. It's not boring to me, but so I think that's a pretty decent intro, at least from a non-scripted, non anything attempt. I don't have any questions. So I think I only have one person that's checking me out right now, which is Gary, I believe. So if you hear this later on and you have questions, let me know. I probably will go and do a scripted, intro into logic or something like that later, and really try to flesh it out. But until then, hopefully this has given you some things to consider. Until next time, whatever. I don't know. I have class dismissed, I guess.